Hi, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon, this early evening's program, which uses poetry to explore the theme of gathering. We're excited to have all of you here with us today. My name is Nat Scheidley. I'm the president and CEO of Revolutionary Spaces, which, in case you missed the news bulletin earlier this year, is a brand new cultural organization here in Boston that was formed by the merger of the Bostonian Society and Old South Association. Through a wide range of programs, community partnerships, contemporary forms of storytelling, and conversations like the one that we're going to have here this evening, we bring people together to explore the history of and continue the work of democracy that is so singularly evoked by the two national treasures that our organization cares for and interprets, and that is Old South Meeting House and the Old State House, located just 2 blocks from each other on Washington Street in the heart of downtown Boston. Tonight's program, as I said, uses poetry to explore the theme of gathering, and that feels like a really appropriate theme to be talking about right now. And it's, I just wanted to, before I turn it over to Erica and Charles, I just wanted to throw out a couple of ideas to keep in mind as you hear Charles read his poetry and the work of other poets, and think about how to get purchase on some of the ideas here. Gathering evokes all kinds of possible connections. One of them is the connection to the physical places that we care for. These incredibly important buildings in American history, which are important because people gathered in them. And this is National Preservation Month, so it's a great opportunity to think about the history of the sites and the way that their continued presence on our city's landscape speaks to us. The Old State House was where elected representatives of the towns of Massachusetts came together to do their work, gathered in tight quarters in the assembly room on the 2nd floor of the townhouse, as it was called in the 18th century. And Old South Meeting House was a congregational church where hundreds of people could gather, but which also was the largest indoor gathering place in colonial Boston, and for that reason became a nexus for popular politics. If you wanted to have a political meeting, that was where you did it. And the buildings have remained important as gathering places, and our organization is committed to continuing to bring people in to connect with the history that took place there, to connect with the debates that took shape in those halls, and to continue those debates today. So think on that. Think on the power of gathering as a tool for changing the world, and that can be the power of people coming together to express their points of view and their voices in one place, or it can be the power of a popular movement, the gathering of ideas, the gathering of shared voices in virtual ways or in a series of protests across space and across time. And in this time of pandemic, this current public health crisis, think also about the longing that we have to gather. And I think some of Charles' work really speaks to this, that we are gathered in small groups now in our homes and with those closest to us, but the opportunity to gather physically with other members of our community is something that we have just beyond our reach. And so we have these virtual tools to come together like we're doing tonight, and that's wonderful. But we're all, I think, grieving the loss of the contact that is so central to human experience. And the power of gathering is perhaps more present in our minds now than ever because we can't do that work. So those are just some ideas to keep in mind as you hear the work and as you think about the theme for tonight. And I'm going to turn it over now to Erica Lindemood, who is our Director of Public and Community Programs.
As well. Charles Coe is the author of 3 books of poetry: All Sins Forgiven, Poems for My Parents, Picnic on the Moon, and the just released Memento Mori, all published by Leapfrog Press. Charles is also author of Spin Cycles, a novella published by Gemma Media. He was selected as a Boston Literary Light by the Associates of the Boston Public Library, and he's a former Artist Fellow at the St. Botolph Club in Boston. Charles was a 2017 artist in residence for the city of Boston, where he created an oral history project that focused on residents of Mission Hill. He is poetry editor of Multiplicity, an online literary journal. Charles has served as poet in residence at Wheaton College and at the Chautauqua Institution in New York State. And he's an adjunct professor of English at Salve Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island, and at Bay Path University in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. And now let's welcome Charles Coe.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many of us hanging out here. You know, I'm kind of old school, and the idea of gathering in an electronic forum is something that I'm getting used to. But I'm really learning, as Erica says, to work in this world, and to have an opportunity like this to spend time with folks that at this point we just could not get together in the same room. It's a marvelous thing. So I'm happy to see you all. And I'd just like to thank Nat for his leadership of Revolutionary Spaces, and to Erica Lindemuth for putting this event together. Couldn't have done it without you. So with that, we will read some poetry. I'm going to start with one on the subject of gathering in spaces that no longer exist. And it's very poignant when there are places that we're familiar with that are taken from us. And this is the story of one such place. This is for the ancient Boston bar with neon shamrocks in the windows, recently departed. Years ago, one rainy afternoon, I wandered into the bar in search of a payphone. Scattered in the gloom, a dozen pairs of eyes, as cold and hard as Irish granite, glanced up and settled on my dark skin. I know that in the proper circumstance, anyone there might have been delighted to crack my skull. Even so, I've seen enough of what I thought was mine slip away, that when I pass their old haunt with its shiny new facade and the flock of brightly plumed young revelers whose mating calls fill the night, I can't help but feel a twinge. Loss makes brothers of us all. Another place we gather, bars, restaurants. Even when we're alone in a restaurant, it's still a gathering of sorts. It's still a potential for running into someone you know. It's the reality of seeing other diners at the other tables you're not talking to, but you're sharing this time with them. And I'm going to share a poem now by one of my favorite poets, Billy Collins. This is Old Man Eating Alone in a Chinese Restaurant. I am glad I resisted the temptation when I was young to write a poem about an old man eating alone in a corner in a Chinese restaurant. I would have gotten it all wrong, thinking, the poor bastard, not a friend in the world, and with only a book for a companion, he'll probably pay the bill out of a change purse. So I'm glad I waited all these decades to record how hot and sour the hot and sour soup is here at Chang's this afternoon, and how cold the Chinese beer in a frosted glass. And my book, Jose Saramago's blindness, as it turns out, is so absorbing that I look up from its escalating horrors only when I am stunned by one of his gleaming sentences. And I should mention the light that falls through the big windows this time of day, italicizing everything it touches, the plates, the teapots, the immaculate tablecloths, as well as the soft brown hair of the waitress in the white blouse and short black skirt, the one who is smiling now as she bears a cup of rice and shredded beef with garlic to my favorite table in the corner. If you're not familiar with Billy Collins' work, I highly recommend that you check him out. He's a former poet laureate and one of those poets who does a wonderful job of mixing humor with the profound. It's wonderful work. And now, this is a poem I just wrote a couple of days ago that I'm test driving right now for the first time, and I'm happy to share this with you. This is Communion, Spring 2020. Again, still in the restaurant, still in the gathering places. Do you remember the days when we'd all meet at some favorite restaurant, stepping in from the cold, breathing clouds of garlic, shrugging out coats for the welcoming hugs? We'd examine the menu with the care of archaeologists blowing dust off a newly discovered Sanskrit tablet. And we'd sit so close, touching sometimes, passing platters back and forth, everyone yakking at once, pausing to join in a ragged chorus of happy birthday drifting over from another table. And finally, as our ravaged plates made their ways back to the kitchen, sometimes we'd pose for a picture taken on someone's cell phone by an indulgent server, our arms wrapped around each other, grinning like high school kids at graduation. Now, those of us who live alone search cookbooks and computers for dishes we make for one. Post pictures of our creations online, not to brag, but to share communion in the only way we can. Sometimes we go into a situation with a preconception, sometimes, always, frequently, most of the time, whichever. And if we are open, if we're willing to be changed, if we're willing to be influenced by what we actually see, then sometimes something happens. Sometimes in the face of authenticity, we're moved off that dime, we're moved off that position, and we learn something. We learn something about the situation. Maybe we learn something about ourselves. I'm a big admirer of the poet Stephen Dunn, And I'm going to share one of his pieces now, which is written in a setting or about a setting maybe a lot of us don't have that much familiarity with, but it's a beautiful portrait of a place and a time. This is Belly Dancer at the Hotel Jerome by Stephen Dunn. Disguised as an Arab, the bouzouki player introduces her as Fatima, but she's blonde, Midwestern, learned to move, we suspect, in continuing education, Tuesday, some hip college town. We're ready to laugh. This is Aspen, Colorado. Cocaine and blue Valium, the local hard liquor. And we, with snifters of Metaxa in our hands, part of the incongruous that passes for harmony here. But she's good. When she lets her hair loose, beautiful. So we revise. Summer vacations, perhaps in Morocco, or an Egyptian lover. We're both. This much we know. No Protestant has moved like this since the flames stopped licking their ankles. Men rise from dinner tables to stick dollar bills where their eyes have been. One slips a 5 in her cleavage. When she gets to us, she's dangling money with a carelessness so vast. It's art. Something perfected, all her bones floating in milk. The fake Arabs on bongos and bouzouki are real musicians, urging her, whispering, Fatima, Fatima, into the mic. And it's true. She has danced the mockery out of that wrong name in this unlikely place. She's Fatima. And the cheap, conspicuous dreams are ours, rising now as bravos. Stephen Dunn is a poet. If you're not familiar with his work, you might want to check him out. Public spaces are other places we gather, parks especially, beaches and parks. Not much in the way of beaches where I'm from in Indianapolis, but there are lots of parks. And one of the parks that my friends and I would hang out at when I was a kid in the summer was, it's called Military Park. And this is a poem about that place at that time. This is Mulberries. One day near the end of summer vacation, when all the easily picked berries had been plundered, a few buddies and I climbed the tallest mulberry tree in Military Park on a dare to the highest branches that would support our weight, and lying back on sturdy limbs, lounging like young lords, reached out to pluck those darkest berries beyond the reach of earthbound peasants. Our only competition, the indignant birds who complained at our intrusion before flying up. With machine-like efficiency, we dispatched those berries, bursting with juice that dyed our lips and tongues and teeth purple, ran down our chins, eating our fill, beyond our fill. We finally slowed, leaning back on our thrones in the sky. Down on the ground, the world carried on in the usual way. There was the distant cry of a baby in a carriage, the rumble of a truck like muted thunder, and all the while creeping up like a slow-moving fog. The inevitability of sixth grade, of starched nuns, and the math homework, and one more step toward distant, unimaginable adulthood. We had no words for any of this. We just felt it in our muscles, our bones. As golden light filtered through the leaves and late afternoon melted into early evening, we knew our mothers stood on porches and back stoops, waiting to call us to the suppers for which we now had no room. The horrid branches had begun to punish our backs, and the rough bark chafe our skin. So on some silent signal, like birds changing course mid-flight, we began our descent, coming down more carefully than we climbed, returning reluctantly to the ordinary world. Another type of gathering. There was a time in the life of the United States of America when most people did not live in cities. They lived in small towns, they lived on farms. And when you lived on a farm, there were things you could not do for yourself. You depended on your neighbors to do. So if someone needed a barn, some new young couple or someone who had just moved to the area, you went to a barn raising. Not that you liked those people or even knew them, but at that time, people realized that you cannot live entirely on your own, that the blessing of and curse of being a human being is that we need each other to survive. And so this poem is sort of uncharacteristic for me because I almost always write about situations I've experienced or observed, things that are real, whatever real means. And this poem is essentially a short story. It's a piece of fiction. Enough editorializing. I'm going to share this with you. This is The Barn Raising, and it is a parable. The Barn Raising. Last month, heat lightning struck my neighbor's barn. We were in a dry spell, and the barn burned like a pile of kindling. Fire lit the night sky for miles. Morning rose on a pile of charred timbers. I know my neighbor from church. When his barn raising was announced at Sunday service, he sat stiff-necked and rigid, as if the lightning bolt were proof he failed God's judgment. The day of the raising was blessed. Clear blue sky. Lumber had been hauled in the week before. walls and rafters all assembled and lying on the ground. And so, 50 men began the dance their fathers danced, and their fathers, and theirs. Slowly, the frame took shape. As the day moved on, my neighbor's face, an icebound stream, began to melt. At last, he climbed the final rafter and nailed a branch of Norway spruce. The pastor said a prayer. My neighbor raised his hammer like a sword. A cheer rang through. At the clearing's edge, a stand of oak trees spilled birds into the sky. And I'll share one more that's related to church. As Erica mentioned in introducing me, I was an artist in residence for the city of Boston in 2017. And what I did on Mission Hill was a project called What You Don't Know About Me, where I interviewed people who lived and worked on Mission Hill and combined excerpts from those interviews with photographs. And the idea was when you would look at the photograph and read the little piece of that person's biography, you would say, I wouldn't have thought that to look at that person. So it was an exercise in undermining expectations and stereotypes, as you will. One of the things I did when I was working on that project was write this poem. It's called The Bells of the Basilica, and it's for Mission Hill Church. When the bells of the Basilica toll the hour, a river of sound flows down Tremont Street. It flows over the donut shop, the pizza parlors, the post office, the hardware store. It flows over the Asian woman who sits waiting for the bus, her ancient wrinkled face, the map of a world to which she will never return. It flows over teenaged girls, released from the bondage of school, who chatter in Spanish like colorful landlocked birds. It flows over the college man who wanders into traffic staring at his phone. The bells of the Basilica toll for believers and non-believers alike, for the loved and the lovely and the unloved, for those whose stories are just beginning and those whose stories are closer to the end. The river of sound washes over everyone and everything on the miracle of this most ordinary day. Two more here. One is from local poet Jill McDonough, who is she's just a wonderful poet. That's all I'll say about her right now. And in the alternate universe, in the vanished world, some of us might be going to a baseball game tonight. Actually, we're supposed to get snow or some such, so perhaps not, but usually we would be going to a baseball game this time of year. This is a poem about places that people gathered in that vanished world, and we shall again. This is We're Human Beings, Jill McDonough. That's why we're here, said Julio Lugo to the Globe. Oh, Sox fans booed poor Lugo. booed his at-bat after he dropped the ball in the pivotal fifth. That ball, I got to it, I just couldn't come up with it. Lugo wants you to know he is fast. A slower player wouldn't even get close enough to get booed. Lugo wants you to know he's only human. We're human beings. That's why we're here. If not, I would have wings. I'd be beside God right now. I'd be an angel, but I'm not an angel. I'm a human being that lives right here. Next day, all is forgiven. Lugo's home run, Lugo's sweet comment to the press. I wanted to make a poster like the ones that say, "It's my birthday," or "First time at Fenway," or pathetic, ESPN. Poster board, permanent marker to say, "Lugo, me too. I'm a human being that lives right here." Decided it's too esoteric, too ephemeral a reference, but it's true. Oh, Lugo. Julio Lugo. I'm here with you. And I'll end with one about family gatherings. And those are the gatherings, in a way, it might be hardest to go without. You know, the need to stay away from the people we love, the need to resist the hug, the kiss, even the simple shared space. I'm going to share this last poem that ends my, not last book, but the book before that, All Sins Forgiven, poems about my parents. This is Christmas night, 1957. Grandma's house was packed with family and friends, all orbiting a dining room table jammed with cakes, pies, cookies, a clove-studded honey-glazed ham, a bronze turkey slightly smaller than a baby pterodactyl. And at the center, the star of the show, a gigantic crystal bowl that appeared but once a year, with a half-gallon chunk of vanilla ice cream floating in a lake of Grandma's eggnog. It had always been Grandpa's job to stir in a fifth of Kentucky bourbon. But for the first time, this ritual was performed by one of his sons, Uncle Roy, perhaps, or Uncle Albert, I don't remember which. But I remember Grandpa's oxblood leather easy chair, empty this year for the first time, keeping a silent watch on the proceedings. At 5, I had no yardstick to measure the hole that chair created in my mother's childhood home. I was too busy weaving through the forest of grown-up legs for another piece of pie. Finally, with the children overtired and sugar-crazed, our coats and hats were gathered, and the exodus began. All night, the spiked nog had been off-limits to my sister and me, but the taste we were allowed just before leaving made us easier to load into the car. On the ride home, while I dozed in the back seat, our station wagon was the world. Warm as a womb, the faithful engine's tireless hum, and drifting from the front, a lullaby, the murmur of our parents' voices.
Let's, I'm gonna just start off by asking you, would you be willing to share with us just a little bit about your selection process for these poems? I mean, once we had agreed on the kind of overarching theme of gathering and talked a little bit about some different aspects of it, how did you go about picking these poems? What was your process like?
Well, it was interesting because once we had our theme, I looked at some of the stuff that I had already written and realized that there were a number of poems that were really addressing those themes. I hadn't thought about it in those terms when I was writing them, but then I realized, oh yeah, poems about gathering in restaurants or in public places, or things related to sports, or things related to going to a concert or whatever. And there was a lot of stuff that, got left out of this event. So it wasn't at a certain point like I had to find out how to find stuff that fit the theme. It was really a question of what to leave out, because there was a lot of stuff. And then when I thought about some of the work of other poets I wanted to include, there's so much wonderful stuff on the theme that it was the same issue. Looking at the Billy Collins, looking at the Stephen Dunn, looking at the Jill McDonough. So it was more a question of figuring out what to leave out than saying, oh, what can I find to fill this space?
Thank you. So yeah, that was that sort of became clear, and it was fascinating to see. Charles and I had talked about the theme a little bit and some of the aspects, and then he sent me a much larger group of poems than we ended up having here for this reading, because we wanted to have some time. An hour is not very long with all the intro and everything. So we wanted to have some time for the conversation. So as I was taking down some notes as I listened to you read and reading over some other comments, what struck me, so just a few things that struck me here, and I sort of wanted to share with you some of and everybody some of the comments, and sort of how I see some of them kind of meshing with each other. I was interested and pleased to see that lots of the responses were responses to the different tangible kind of sensory qualities evoked in these poems. And we had responses to visual, touch, taste, I think maybe not directly sound, but I think perhaps sound, just a lot of the tangible qualities, which I think is part of what makes a poem so special, is that those sensory things really stand out and sort of become meaningful. Some examples, somebody commented on the phrase from I should have written down the titles, because now I'm struggling. The Belly Dancer poem from the Belly Dancer poem by Stephen Dunn, the dollar bills where their eyes have been. And so I was thinking about that as being both kind of visual and also touch, sort of that all multi-sensory. Somebody commented on the phrase "spilled birds into the sky," and that was at the end of was it communion? I think the barn raising.
Barn raising, yeah.
At the end, which had struck me too when I read it on the page. I was really looking forward to hearing you speak that, because even from reading it on the page, it was just a very powerful image. And it just seemed to me almost as I read it and as I heard you saying it, it seemed to me that I could see the bird, the tree spilling, or is it the tree that's spilling the birds?
The birds spilling trees into the sky.
The stand of oak trees spilled birds into the sky. I could see the birds, and I could also hear their wings, just from that, so that was really powerful. Somebody wrote for the Mulberries poem, I could feel the mulberry juice running through my mouth, lips, chin, yum. So there's the feeling, and then there was the taste, the memory of taste too. So it just struck me that it's comforting. There's a comforting quality of imagining and sort of having these sensory impressions evoked by these poems at a time when many of us feel like we're missing a lot of these elements
Right.
of sharing these sensory and sharing touch and sharing, the food together, and we were describing in the restaurant going and you know sitting close and touching each other and
Touching
all of
each
those
other.
things. So and somebody wrote just towards the end, somebody wrote that it's weird to feel nostalgic for something we could do just a couple of months ago,
Right.
but we are, right?
Yeah. It something you just think, this just popped into my head. It's a weird connection. But in 1939, there were people on this beautiful sunny morning in Poland sitting at their tables drinking tea and uh, eating breakfast. And there was this thunder in the distance. And they thought, that's odd. Thunder. It's a sunny day. And it was the Nazis making their advance. And their world was changed instantly, completely, and forever. So we go through our days, or we went through our days, thinking, oh yeah, things are this way, and I've got this stuff in my address, in my calendar, and I'm going to be doing those things. But we don't know. We don't know, and we never know. And I think one thing this period has shown us, as much as anything else, we in America who are sort of complacent in a certain way, that nothing is guaranteed, that throughout history there have been people who enjoyed a certain level of comfort or sense of entitlement or whatever, and it can all change at the flip of a switch. And it has changed at the flip of a switch.
Sorry. So that what you just said just is a good transition to a couple of other questions I was going to share, um, from I think two different people. Somebody was asking whether your writing routine has changed during this time, and then somebody else asked, what are you feeling? What are you feeling unique, what's unique about isolation as a poet, and is there anything particularly rewarding, I guess, rewarding about some aspect of isolation as a poet or a writer?
Interesting question. Well, I've been retired for like 5 years plus now, so I've been very used to not having to hop on the train and go somewhere to do my thing. So in a certain sense, my routine hasn't changed that much, but it's different when you're sort of sequestering yourself by choice, and when it's imposed on you.
Mm.
And when it's imposed on you, I, like everybody on this conversation right now, has periods of feeling disoriented and sad and distracted and um, frightened and sad and angry and all those things. That I alternate between being very productive, working on my writing and working with my writing students on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are days when I can't get my eyeballs to point in the same direction. And I really, I can't concentrate on anything. I had something important, quote unquote, I was supposed to do a few days ago, and I was sitting at the computer and I just could not concentrate on it. So I just turned the computer up and, went to the TV to watch nude celebrity bowling or whatever. I couldn't process it. So I think we need to give ourselves permission now.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, no matter who you are, if you're, an ordinary person, or if you're a quote creative person, unquote, this isn't the time to worry about writing the great American novel. This is the time to freaking stay alive
Mm-hmm.
and to keep the people you love alive and safe. I don't know. That's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you. a couple of other comments kind of related to reflections on this time, sort of different views. One person I thought it was fascinating. Somebody was commenting on the belly dancing poem. Again, Stephen Dunn. They wrote that this pandemic time feels like dancing through a fake time, that you can't tell what's real, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then somebody else commented about feeling connections, that in their positive moments that they can see neighbor to neighbor connection. It's not barn raising. They were talking about the barn raising, but being able in this time to be able to see connections among neighbors. It's not barn raising, but it's what we have, and it outweighs the bad stuff all the time. And so I'm like, oh, well, that's a positive approach. And I think for me, it's sometimes it's about being able to just focus on the positive, and you can't do it all the time, but finding those small moments. And that's kind of connected for me with what this poetry, reading poetry and hearing you read poetry does, is that it gives us these little moments that we can focus and almost meditate on, these moments of sensory impression and memory and joy.
Right. Anytime people go through difficulty, bad times, hard times don't create character, they reveal it. So there are some people, and we won't even talk about the people who are doing and saying horrible things in response to what's happening now. And then there are other people who are performing acts of tenderness and generosity that are humbling, that are breathtaking. And so in a small way, I think that poetry can, and the arts can help people remember, can remind them what people are capable of in the good way, even when a lot of things around us are depressing and distressing and all that other stuff. We without being Pollyannas and pretending that the bad stuff isn't bad, we make a decision to not let the bad stuff consume us. It's like, if you look at the news is always bad. So watch the news for a bit if you want to, and then turn the news off and look around in your community at the people who are doing wonderful things, at the healthcare people who are just, they're heroes. They're, these nurses are Wonder Woman, as far as I'm concerned. And not just Wonder Guy, if there's such a thing as Wonder Guy, because a lot of the nurses are guys as well. But the people who are just helping their neighbors, who are, when parents with kids that are cooped up are kind of starting to go dinky-dow, they go down to their basement and they find toys that their kids who are grown and gone were used, and they'll put a box of toys and games and puzzles on a neighbor's porch and text them and say, hey, look on your porch. So that stuff is going on all the time, all around us. So, we need to focus on that, not to the exclusion of being informed and aware, not sticking our heads in the sand, but just choosing what we're going to give energy and power to.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to kind of close out on for today. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And it was really fabulous to see your comments. And I'm sorry I didn't get to share everything, but I think we got, it was nice to see some conversations going on, and people are still writing and saying this is a time for reflection, and 3 cheers for Charles. So I second that. And so I'd just like to turn it over to Nat to say a few words to close out the program.
Yeah, thank you, Erica, and thank you all for gathering with us this evening. And I hope that that you enjoyed this as much as I did. Charles's words of wisdom and his art are a wonderful way to end the week and give us plenty to think about as we head into the weekend. One of the hardest things about gathering virtually in this way is that we can't actively share our appreciation with Charles by way of applause, but I know that all of you would want to join with me in thanking him for sharing with us this evening. And Charles, I know when you're answering the questions and also reading, it's hard to look in the chat box, but I hope you'll take a moment to look in there, because as we've gone through this, there have been so many warm words of appreciation and so many fantastic questions that we weren't able to get to this evening. And to all of you, I hope that you'll consider coming back and gathering with us many times over the coming months. We'll be hosting more virtual events like this. Some of them will be for the general public. Some of them will be limited exclusively to members and donors of Revolutionary Spaces. An example of an event that we're doing just next week is we're going to have our favorite Boston playwright, Patrick Gabridge, the author of Blood on the Snow, come in and have a conversation with me about the power of place and the challenges that are involved with telling the stories that are embedded in our historic places here in Boston and around the country. I hope you'll stay on the lookout for information in your inboxes and on social media for more about those events, and come back often to join us. If you're not already a member of Revolutionary Spaces or would like to support our work, please know that you can join or donate anytime at our website, which is revolutionaryspaces.org. And I hope you'll also follow us on social media. We're trying to build a robust and frequent presence on social media, so you can follow us on Twitter at RevSpaces, also at RevSpaces on Instagram, or Revolutionary Spaces on Facebook. So once again, thank you, Charles, for sharing with us this evening. Thank you, Erica, for your help with moderating the conversation. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Stay safe and have a great weekend.
Take care, everyone. Yes, stay safe. And we'll get to the other side of this.